Alright, so finding angles given two sides. So if I give you this triangle, that's theta. Say I give you 5 and 3. Notice here you don't have this angle. You know it's got to be less than 90 because the triangle is 180 and this is 90. Therefore these two angles have to add up to be 90, or they're complementary angles. So we don't know what this angle is, but if I use the two sides I can find it. If I've given you this equation, sine of capital A, well, the question might be is what's the difference between a capital letter and a lowercase letter? I label this triangle. Those are capital letters there. Capital letters mean angles. Class, what do capital letters mean? Angles. So angle A is, how much is this space? Angle C is 90 degrees. Capital letter B, it means angle B, it's that angle. Well, what would you need to do in order to solve for theta here? Well, from here is my starting point. And you can label the sides. Class, what side is that? Opposite. Going across, so that's opposite. This one is the hypotenuse. Class, which trig ratio has opposite and hypotenuse?
Sine.
Sine. Now pay attention. We don't know what that angle is called. So you would do something like this. To solve for this angle, you're going to find information about the side lengths. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to take the inverse. And when you take the inverse, it looks like this. This symbol here is -1. Now it's not -1 power, but I'll explain that later. So we read this as the angle is equal to the inverse of sine of x. So this is the inverse of sine. Class, how would you read this one? Inverse of cosine. And this one is?
Inverse of tangent.
Inverse of tangent. So let's remember, to find angles, if you ever have to find an angle, you have to use the word inverse. And the symbol for the inverse is that -1. Let's talk about some warnings. Warnings. Where does this idea of, let's say I want the inverse of tangent. Well, we've actually heard this word inverse before. If I asked you y equals x squared, and I ask you to find the inverse function, what you did back then is you did what? You switched the x's and y's. You guys remember that? Yeah. And then you solve for the y. So y equals x squared, its inverse is y equals the radical x. That was the inverse. So essentially, if I said something like this, tangent of x equals 6/11. If I ever wanted to ask you to solve for this, you would do the same thing. You would switch them. Another word for switch is what, class? Inverse. To show the inverse, the symbol for inverse is that -1. So you would say the inverse of tangent of 6/11 equals x. Do you see how I switched places? But don't forget when you switch places to put the inverse. Now let's put this into our calculators. It doesn't tell us, but I'm going to tell you I want degree mode. So you press on mode, you have degrees. And then here I'm just going to put in the inverse of tangent. So the inverse of tangent is the yellow button. So I'm going to press second tan. It is okay to put both fractions or decimals, one or the other. And press enter. Therefore, x represents an angle that is approximately 28.6 degrees. Okay, so again, if I gave you this triangle, let's show you. x. And let's just say I gave you the length 6 and 11. Nice triangle, huh? Opposite over the adjacent. Well, what I'm finding here is based off these two sides, I can find the angle. Now, a warning is that here, this does not mean the reciprocal. X to the negative 1 power, if I asked you to simplify that exponent, you would put it over 1. You would take this whole expression and switch places. So your answer for this problem would be 1 over x. This is the reciprocal. What I mean by not reciprocal is tangent, not reciprocal, is that tangent, inverse of tangent of x is not equal to 1 over tangent of x. Do you see that? You're not going to make it a fraction and then take it downstairs. You're not doing that. Okay? So again, the big idea is that take the inverse, you're going to do a switching. Make sure you put that symbol, and it does not mean the reciprocal.